If your eggs don't come out of your cast iron pan like this, leaving almost no mess at all and absolutely no scrubbing, then maybe it's time to re-season your pan. In this video, I'm going to be showing you exactly how to strip old seasoning off a cast iron pan and how to re-season a pan or season a pan from scratch. All right, so when you have a pan that has any sort of chipping, scratching, or you're starting to see rust or bare spots on it, it's time to strip it and to re-season it. The first step in stripping it is getting all the old seasoning off. Now, the easiest way to do this is with heat. If you have access to a fire, a campfire, maybe even a wood burning stove in your house, there's a really easy way to do it. If you don't have access to that, the next easiest way to doing it is to put it into an oven that has a self-clean mode. If you don't have one, ask around and see if your friends do, because this is gonna make your life way easier. You just put it in, turn the oven on self-clean and let it go. Now, for the fire, what you want to do is build up a fire, nice campfire of some sort, and then let it die down to just the gray coals. You don't want red hot burning coals, and you don't want flame in this because you don't want to warp your pan. This right here is at a perfect level. It has lots of active coals in it, but it's not really, really hot. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take this pan. This is a pan that I got at a yard sale. It's actually an old Wagner pan, but it's got a lot of chipping. When I do this, the seasoning is just flaking right off. So this really needs a new coat of seasoning. Now, if you have a pan that's completely stripped, you can skip this step. Maybe you just bought a brand new cast iron pan, you just want to add some seasoning, or maybe it's an unseasoned but brand new cast iron pan. You can totally skip the stripping step and move right onto the seasoning step, which I'm going to show you in just a minute. But right now we're going to get this completely buried into the coals of the fire. Then we're going to let it just sit there until the fire is cold. Usually it'll be the next morning before you're ready to pull it out. All right, so here we are back at the fire pit, and the fire has completely died out. This has been sitting all night, and we have our pan here. You can see that it is now, well, now it's a mess, but it's completely cool. You can see here that now we're seeing the edges of rust, unlike what we saw before. That means that we've gotten all the seasoning off of that pan. That's exactly what we want. So our next step here is to go ahead and take this inside to the sink, and we're going to scrub this all the way up. If there is any remaining flakes or anything like that on here, go ahead and use like some steel wool or the scrubby side of a sponge or something to go ahead and clean up all of the flakes all the way around the pan. Make sure you don't forget the bottom. You can see down here, while it's coming off, there are some flakes still stuck in here, but that's going to scrub right off. You're going to go ahead and use lots of soap and water for this washing in the sink and get it all the way cleaned up. All right, now here we are back in the kitchen, and we're ready to actually start the re-seasoning process. Now I have scrubbed up this pan. I did have to use a little bit of steel wool to get all of the flakes off, and you can see it's still wet because I washed it really well. Now it's going to take on this kind of dull, maybe slightly red look, but when you rub your finger on it, it shouldn't have any red dust or anything like that on there. It's because it's just freshly washed. Now, it's important to note that at this point, your cast iron is completely unprotected. That means you really need to move on to this next step right away. Otherwise, you're going to have potentially problems with rust and damage to your cast iron since it's completely unprotected. So we need to get that seasoning back on there. So the first step, now that I have this very washed, you can see that bottom that was flaky. It all came off really nicely with that steel wool. And I have an oven preheating to 200 degrees. I'm going to put this in there for about 10 minutes just to make sure it is completely dry. There's no little bits of water in the holes or anything in here. We want to make sure it's 100% dry and warm before we start. Now, I wanted to show you really quickly before we do that, this other pan that I'm going to do. Now, this is a brand new Stargazer pan. I'm super excited about this pan. I love it because it's a modern smooth pan. So if you run your hands on here, it is a completely smooth cast iron surface. Very different than that modern rough. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, go back and watch my video on choosing cast iron. We talk about the different types of cast iron. Now this is going to give you a much more non-stick surface by the time you get it done. This comes straight from the Stargazer company, seasoned. But it's my rule, even when I get a seasoned pan into the kitchen, a brand new one, I add a few new layers of seasoning. So I am going to start with just a good gentle wash on this. Wash like I would for a seasoned pan, not with a scrubby steel wool or with soap like I did on that other pan that's now unseasoned, but just a gentle wash to get it all clean. And then I'm going to put this in that same 200-degree oven at the same time to make sure it's completely dry before we move on to the next step. Okay, while those pans are in the oven and they're drying, let's talk about the other pieces that you're gonna need to reseason a pan. First of all, cast iron that's in the process of being seasoned can make an absolute mess of your counter. So you'll see I have kind of a sacrificial towel down here, something you don't mind getting ruined in the process, maybe a little oily. The next thing that you're gonna want is some fat or oil. Now, it's traditional to use a lard or a tallow, and those work really well. But you know, I really find that an extra virgin coconut oil or a flax oil are the best for this step of the process. I think they give the best finish at the end. You can also use a canola oil or a sunflower oil if that's what you have on hand, but I really recommend going with the extra virgin coconut oil if you can get your hands on that and have some in the house. You're not going to need very much, and that's one of the real tricks to seasoning a cast iron pan well, is not using too much oil. Now, the other thing that you're going to want is a stack of some sort of disposable rag or paper towel. Now, if you guys have been following me for a while, you know that I prefer not to use anything disposable, but I do keep a roll of paper towels stashed way up in an upper cabinet just for projects like this, because I would end up ruining a lot of rags with oil and have to throw them away. So I prefer to just use a few paper towels for this process. So after this dries for about 10 minutes in the oven, we're going to pull it out, let it cool down just enough so that we can handle it, and then we'll be ready for the next step. Okay, now this pan has completely dried. It's still warm. I can almost handle it, and that's perfect. It was in that 200-degree oven for about 10 minutes. So it's a very dry, and you want to keep it warm, but you can let it cool to handleable. You don't need to burn yourself working with it. So right now I went ahead, as soon as I pulled that out of the oven, and I turned my oven up to 375 degrees. If you are using flax oil, coconut oil, lard, anything like that, 375 degrees is what you're going to aim for in your oven. If you're using a canola oil or a sunflower oil, you're going to want to turn that up closer to 450, 475 degrees. That's because you want it just a little bit above the smoking point of the oil to make it actually combine with the cast iron, bake on there and make a layer for you. But you don't need it too much above that smoke point. Now, we're going to go ahead and take our coconut oil and we're going to put just a nice layer of that all over the entire pan. Make sure you season your handle, your second grip over here, the bottom of your pan. This is what's going to help your pan not get rusty and keep it protected from the weather and from the elements, even humidity in your house. So you want to make sure your entire pan is protected. But here's the thing. You want as little on there as possible while still coating it all. So we're going to put it on there just a nice layer. And then I'm gonna get another paper towel and I'm gonna try to rub off all that oil that I just put on there. Now I know that seems a little counterintuitive, but the biggest problem people have with seasoning their cast iron is they put on way too much oil. Then they end up with sticky seasoning or uneven seasoning. You don't want any of that. Now you can see why it's important to have this pan slightly warm, because it's just kind of melting that oil right onto it. That's just what we want. Okay, so now I'm gonna take another paper towel, totally clean, dry one, and I'm gonna try to wipe it all off. I don't know if you can see, but we're getting little bits of paper towel on there. That's okay. That is going to come off as the seasoning process progresses. Don't worry about that too much. Okay, so I'm just trying to wipe it off, and on the inside too. Go back and try and get off any excess that you have. You should never have any dripping, puddling, pooling, anything like that. Okay, now we're gonna get it back into that oven at that 375 degrees, and we're gonna leave it in there for about 30 minutes. You do not need to put this in upside down. This should not drip because we've taken off all the excess. I know a lot of directions say to put it in upside down. Just completely not necessary, but you can if you want. I'm gonna do the same thing to that brand new pan, that Stargazer pan that I have, and I'm gonna get that in the oven too. Now, we're gonna do the same process at least twice, but generally you want to aim for 3 to 4 times. 4 is really just the best number that you can get for getting a solid layer of seasoning on your pan that's going to help it be protected and the most non-stick possible. So make sure you leave yourself enough time to do 3 to 4 coats of this at one time. Okay, back into the oven. Okay, so when that 30-minute timer went off, I went ahead and turned the oven off, but I left the pan in there for just a few minutes to stop smoking and cool down just a little bit. That, especially if you have a fan in your oven or an exhaust in your oven, that's really going to help keep the air quality in your kitchen a little bit better. This is one of those projects though, if you're doing it inside, it can get a little smoky in the house. The air can get a little heavy. It's a great thing to do on a day that you can open up the doors or windows a little bit. Now this pan is now gone through that first layer of seasoning, and you can see that it no longer has that raw look where you know, it was very matte and very dull looking and kind of rusty looking. Now it has a slight sheen to it. Now you can also see that there's absolutely no puddling, no pooling at all of any oil. So that's just what we're looking for. This is really well done. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and do this exact same thing again. We're gonna start, first of all, I wanna show you. When you do this right at the beginning, the first level or two, you are gonna get some oil residue off on your pan. By the time you've done this about 4 times, you will no longer be getting this off of your pan. It's just gonna be a solid, smooth surface. So it's a really good way to know when you've seasoned your pan enough, is when you stop getting the residue off of it. So right now, we're gonna go ahead and add another very thin coat of our coconut oil all the way around to all surfaces of the pan. And then once again, we're gonna go ahead and wipe that all the way off. Then we're gonna get it back into that 375-degree oven for another 30 minutes. We're gonna do that process completely through 4 times. So make sure you have the time for that. Now, in upcoming videos, I am going to show you how to maintain the seasoning and how to cook with your cast iron properly so that those eggs slide right off of them when you cook them and you don't have a lot of cleaning to do. Guys, enjoy your cast iron. It's such a wonderful thing to have on hand. It's going to last you generations if you take good care of it. We'll see you soon.